From the first moments, as we move past the open portal and the light begins to dim, we are met by a sight unlike any other. The air itself hums lightly with the sound of shifting leaves and creatures. Massive plant life seems to engulf almost every open space. These are palpable markers of a world filled with the bounty of life, something we have never seen as travelers. It is a world still untouched. For a moment, as we stand at the gateway to this lush new land, we feel, perhaps for the first time, a strange sense of peace. Its people are known as the Pan, a humanoid goat-like being with wild agility and cunning. They are a complex and diverse society that finds its roots far away from where they are now. Originally, the Pan lived on a separate continent. The Pan culture was focused around the general needs of the tribe, having no real social or political structure to speak of. The people worked as one, each with a role to play. Many of the Pan, aside from being capable workers and farmers, were trained as fighters, learning from a young age to wield a spear or blade. We can see this tradition carried to this day, as even the most inept of Pan warriors can be a dangerous enemy. Aside from the general populace, there were also the Red Widows and the Vaunt. The Red Widows were women who charged themselves with the healing and care of the sick. They would also see to the final days of the dying, following the Pan funerary process before entombing the bodies. The Vaunt were the closest that the Pan had to a leader. More akin to shamans and prophets, their role was to advise the people through visions and communion, as well as acting as interpreters and speakers for many faces, the Pan's guardian. When a mysterious plague began rampaging through their home, it was the Vaunt who asked many faces for a vision. Through this, the Pan decided to venture through the Black Sea in an attempt to find salvation. As the terrible disease continued to consume, the remaining Pan boarded their ships and set sail. Guided by the Vaunt seers and under the protection of their guardian, over 1,600 Pan left their ancestral home and set sail over the starless expanse. During this journey, the Vaunt received another vision, one that would signify their safe arrival. They saw the visage of a red doe. They considered it a good sign and shared the news with their people that their journey was set for success. But the Vaunt saw something else in their scrying, a terrible beast that ravaged and destroyed, that of a large black wolf. This they chose to keep secret from their people, a decision considered wise, as knowing such a danger awaited would have set the Pan into a panic. As they landed upon the lush shores, the Vaunt prostrated themselves upon the earth, begging their guardian for another vision. For 80 days they fasted and waited, the remaining Pan still waiting upon the ships. On the final day, their prayers were answered. A red doe, similar to the one they had seen, slowly made its way out of the brush and trees, presenting itself before the Vaunt. With a simple gesture, it touched the ground and then carefully returned to the darkness of the forest. This was the sign they wished for, a marker that this land was clean and accepting of their arrival. The Pan rejoiced and made for shore. They named the land Yaesha, meaning King Mother. The Vaunt felt the creeping pressure of the black wolf upon their necks. However, a more pressing matter would soon present itself. A red widow by the name of Ginas began to show signs of the plague her people had left behind. Fearing the worst, her sisters abandoned their usual entombment traditions and instead wrapped her body in scented cloths, then placed her deep in the forest so she would pass. As the days of mourning went on, the widows were surprised by Ginas as she rejoined her kind. Her body healed and free of disease. With her, she carried a vision which would cement the future for all Pan, the Than. In this moment, the Empress was born, a position which fell upon Ginas in her guidance. The Than, a massive tree, became the center and focus of the Pan's new efforts. Their newly found drive would be halted. As homes were being built and society was growing, the Pan were set upon by that which the Vaunt had kept secret. The Black Wolf had become aware of their presence in his territory, and so it set about destroying the Pan and their new home. After numerous attacks and deaths, the Pan resorted to making offerings to the beast in an attempt to stave off its wrath. This seemed to please it. As the Pan offered tribute and worship, the Ravager, now named, ceased his attacks and allowed the Pan to live unharmed. The wolf became a symbol for the Pan, one to be respected and feared. They recognized that it, like everything else, was deeply linked to Jayesha. The Pan grew in size and power. Their structures became part of the landscape, and the people themselves began to learn and attune to Jayesha and her secrets. It was Lemir, one of the common Pan, who first discovered the hidden power within the natural crystals which existed in this place. Her ingenuity and skill gave birth to a new group within the Pan, the Ahane. Known also as the Radiant Ones, this group began to unravel the power that flowed through the earth. They learned that everything on Jayesha was truly connected. From the Ravager to the lowliest insect, to the Pan themselves and the crystals they now studied. It was all part of a large system where energy and magic flowed. They were all children of Jayesha. The Empress established herself and her closest sisters as the ruling class over the Pan. Each one ate from the fruit of the Thane, and in turn, each one became an immortal. They set themselves as leaders and elders, taking to their castles and temples. Their children and mates became nobles and rulers of the lower class, and the common Pan worker became slaves. The immortals began issuing the Ahane to create spells and magics for their use. In reality, the Ahane were merely glorified crafters and workers. Their efforts yielded little reward, and only the immortals and the Empress knew what uses their inventions saw. With this new magic at their disposal, the Pan rid themselves of any threat that Jayesha could provide. Their influence spread wide over the continent. Villages grew as population increased. All the while, the Empress used the Thane and its fruit to control and command the immortals and the nobles that served under her. In turn, they oppressed the common Pan and forced them into slavery. For years upon years, this cycle would continue. The nobles grew in power, some dying off and being replaced. All the while, the Empress and her queens spread their influence and power. It was a system which settled into place through force. The Pan commoners began believing that they owed their lives to the immortal, and that working was their destiny. Jayesha always brings change, though. Slowly, rumors began circulating that the Thane had died. The fruit which held control over the lives of all the Pan was no longer growing. Unrest started growing among the nobles and immortals, though the fruit was still being provided by the Empress. The nobles spoke in secret and schemed as to how they would maintain power if their immortality was no longer secured. Years after the secrets began to worm their way into the nobility, another tragedy struck. The Pan's guardian, a being who had kept with its people for generations, was slain by the hand of an outsider. A Paxoltek, much like us, took the life of the protector. This set much of the nobility, as well as the Empress herself, further on edge. The whispers of a coup shifted through the temple halls, yet none acted against she who held the fruit of the Thane. The Empress knew of these worries and blamed the slaves for the misfortune that had fallen the nobility. Her fury struck out to the people, sending her guard to slaughter innocent villages. This was an act to both threaten those that would try to usurp her, as well as appease those that followed her rule. Some of her court would not stand by as countless Pan were killed on a whim. One of the Empress's personal sentries, a valiant warrior named Navun, decided to stand against the cruelty that attacked her people. Navun rebelled against the nobility, gathering forces from the common Pan and forming a resistance group to try to overthrow the current rule. He was helped in many great ways by Commander Ford, who ventured to Jayesha a century before we arrived. From his notes, we see that the Pan people were eager to learn of revolution, a concept wholly alien to them as a culture. Ford spoke to them of the war America had fought to gain its freedom from oppression. He taught them of history and of battle. He also smuggled weapons from Earth to the Pan, granting them a boon in the way of technology to combat the potent magics the Ahane produced. From Navun, we also learned that the Thane is indeed dead. The Empress keeps a supply of the fruit for herself and her court stocked away. This is how she has maintained control over the nobility until this day. But it is a course that even the Empress knows cannot last. The Pan are in revolt. The people have suffered enough, and under the guidance of Navun, they are beginning to organize and rise up against their oppressive kin. The queens and nobles stir within their chambers as the threat of death looms over them all. They strike out to the people in fits of rage and fear. Within her temple, the Empress calls upon her servants to gather noble bodies, new and strange tests are conducted on the corpses, some of which return to a putrid state of living. There is a war brewing within the trees. A drastic change whispers in the wind. Beneath the ground, in the forgotten places, a familiar enemy grabs hold of Yaesha and bides its time before striking. There is still much more that Yaesha has for us to see. Hello all! First, I would like to give a huge thank you to the amazing folks over at the official Remnant Discord server. They helped me gather some of the information for the video and fill in the blanks. Thank you as well to Dylan, one of the devs from Remnant, who was a huge help in filling in some of the blanks of the story. As always, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit the subscribe button, it means the world to me. If you made it this far and want more sweet juicy lore, check out the playlist for Remnant on my channel, it's getting longer every week. Also, check out some of the links below for social media, our Discord server is starting to fill up nicely.